If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
It's the point in the off-season. I guess there have been some games played. We have spring training going on, but for me, it's kind of still the off-season where we're looking for, these little bits of information that will help guide us to how our team is going to perform in the upcoming season. Scott, how you doing today, brother?
I'm good. I'm good. One day closer to Miami and watching some meaningful baseball, and I'm pumped. And I keep, but though, my day off this week switched a little bit, so I got excited. I was like, okay, I'm going to be home. I got nothing else going on. I'm going to watch some spring training baseball. I'm going to get to see my Buccos, and they had a day off.
Yeah. And that's the weirdest thing in the world because, there's games, and we were talking about this beforehand, where, I'm basically looking at, the game is starting. I don't have the Sportsnet Pittsburgh. I don't have the other stuff pulled up. And it's like, oh, there's a 105 game. I'll be able to toss it on while I'm like doing my work and everything like that. And it's just like, oh, no, this one's not really on anything. You might be able to listen to this one. And it's very weird stuff. But to me, like, I looked at probably the most consistent Pirate over the past few years, aside from kind of like a blip season in 2020, and that would be Brian Reynolds. And people look to spring training stats, they're trying to pull anything from it. And I looked at Brian Reynolds' stats from those like previous few years where he's had very consistent. He hasn't been, that all-star, that, otherworldly performer that he was in like 2021. And we were always looking for him to kind of come back to that. But he's always been very consistent. So like people are like saying, like, how did this guy perform in spring training? Brian Reynolds in 2023 had an OPS of 615. In 2024, he had an OPS of 737. This year, he has an OPS, as it currently stands, of 678. And I know with like veteran players, like they'll be like, well, he's going to show up no matter what. But he's also seeing a lot of the starting pitching. He's seeing a lot of the different stuff. So, like, for him to not perform well, kind of like blows spring training out of the water. We were talking about football beforehand here. Do Steelers fans put any weight whatsoever into, their preseason games? Absolutely not. But us as Pirates fans, we are so starved for this information that we put so much weight of what happens. And we did see, Jared Jones last year, blow the doors off of everybody and make the team. So there are those types of things that happen. But for the most part, for me, like I started looking at his numbers. He's had a few good years here and there. He had a 933 in 2020. And I know there was a shutdown. You had to get started back up. But for the most part, like, there's not very many good spring training seasons in there for your most consistent player. So I don't know why we're kind of trying to hang our hat or make these assumptions of what a player is going to be based upon how they're performing during a spring training, there's so many different things that are happening. Guys are trying different pitches. Hitters are trying different approaches. I mean, I don't say that players can like flip a switch, but it definitely seems like players flip a switch. Brian Reynolds had a 737 OPS last year and then is hitting, I believe it was a game tying home run in the first game of the season. So I don't know where I'm going with this, Scott. It's just to me, it's what we're kind of waiting and hoping for. But I think we look way too much into what happens in spring training.
Yeah, I think in the at least Pittsburgh, spring training is the preseason that does get the most attention. It gets the most focus. The most hopes are hung on that. But yeah, let's think about that. The Steelers, like you said, spring or the preseason games mean next to nothing. Um, I don't think I've ever even watched a Penguins preseason game. And so, but baseball is a different animal. Football is one day a week. Baseball becomes part of our daily ritual. And starved is the right word. Use the right word there because so many of us, and especially being Pirates fans, there is a tribe of us that consume pirates day in and day out, and because of the position that they've been in for so many years, it's a fraternity. It is, but like I said, tribe. It's a family. um Not to sound cheesy, we are family. But we we band together. Baseball becomes so much a part of our everyday lives throughout the summer. We get starved for it. It's like a nice summer day. You look at the sky and you're trying to make pictures out of the clouds in your mind because you want you want to make something out of nothing. And so that's what a lot of us do when we watch spring training games is try to pick out the little pieces of what's going on when in reality, like you said, somebody might be tweaking their swing a little bit. Somebody might be trying a new pitch. But really, these guys are professionals, and I think that they can just flip a switch. They can get to a major league ballpark and be back, especially somebody who's a veteran, get back into the rhythm of things and feel familiar. And okay, it's showtime. Let's go. The lights are on, ready to rock and roll. Where in spring training, it's just, I don't want to say it's a vacation because those guys are putting in hard work, but that's exactly what it is. They're working, they're practicing. There was what was it, Burrows earlier this week that he kind of things got out of hand during an inning, so they pulled him, and then the next inning started and they ran him back out. That doesn't happen in the regular season, so these games mean nothing. But we're just trying to, because we love it so much and we immerse ourselves in the sport. We're just trying to make heads or tails of whatever's going on.
And the other piece of this is that, I mean, there are these spring breakout games happening with like a lot of the Pirates prospects, and there are different eyes. I've seen some videos from some people that I usually don't see from Pirate City, and they show you kind of what's also going on behind the scenes. I know, Scott, you mentioned, I think it was either last episode or the episode before, that Jack Swinski had played, first base in an inter squad game. We see videos today of Eddie Rodriguez like actually being a starter in a game. Don't know what position that he played, but he was out there taking some hacks in a game against, I believe it was the Orioles prospects, which who may have some people kind of like trickled into that as well. Last season when I was down there, I was taking video of Martin Perez, starting a game where people would be like, well, where's Perez been for, the past week or so? And it's like, well, they don't always travel to the other sites, so they get their work in an inter squad game. We had, Paul Skeens, who his game was going to be rained out where it was supposed to be played. He throws a simulated game at Lecom. So I mean, the games that even we are able to see, because we're not able to see every game because not every stadium has the technology to be able to bring that to us, or it's just not in the contract of what it may be for Pittsburgh Sportsnet or whoever it was. So we're not seeing all these games. There's this other work going on that happens kind of behind the scenes. If we don't see a reliever, or we don't see a starter, or we don't see a position player for 3 or 4 days, it doesn't mean they haven't had any live action during that time. It just basically means that they haven't been in, the game or the starting lineup in a spring training game that is being played between two major league teams. I mean, when I was down there, I was looking at some of the rosters of the teams that were traveling to us. And, of course, my son, my nephew, or whoever is like, well, who is the best player on this team? And I was like, well, this is the best player that they brought,
Right.
but there's like 3, 4, 5 other guys that I would put above those players as to who are their marquee players. So that's like the crazy thing about spring training is that, I mean, like you said, you have a guy go out there, he has a bad inning, they pull him before it ends, they put him back out there in the next inning, and we're supposed to, I mean, I wouldn't say believe in these stats, but to kind of take something from them and kind of, make decisions for the team, or at least think about the types of decisions these teams are going to make, where, I mean, in the end, like, I feel like a lot of the decisions are made behind the scenes. A lot of the analysis is made behind the scenes, talking with the players, watching them on the backfields, seeing them in warmups, different things like that. I mean, obviously, I want to watch the spring training games, but I want to watch the spring training games because I miss baseball so much.
Yeah.
Not that I am, trying to come up with an analogy or a reason for why this player should start or why this, player shouldn't start. And it's the other thing of like, you see a player like Bednar go out and struggle like he did today. I mean, for anybody, we're recording on Thursday and he did not have his best outing. It could mean something, but it could also mean absolutely nothing, in that he was working on whether it would be a delivery change, a pitch change. It could be him, trying to locate pitches in certain corners, and not being able to do so. And then going back to, once the regular season starts, going back to the old delivery and whatever it may be. That's the type of stuff that happens, because I saw a bunch of people saying, trade Bednar and, who's our new closer and different stuff like that. I mean, everybody knows my stance on Bednar. I thought he should have been gone 2 years ago. And that was from a trade, not from because, poor performance, because of the instability of relievers. But I wouldn't take one outing from Bednar and a poor performance and say, oh no, that this is what he's going to be for the rest of the year. Could he struggle? Absolutely. Could he not? I mean, really, who knows?
Yeah, and that's what makes spring training such a tricky thing to analyze because of the unconventional decisions they make. The stats can be all over the place. Hey, big shout out to Josh and Jake at Bridge to Bucktober because of the opponent quality that they've brought to the forefront. That stat, the baseball reference. If anybody hasn't heard their episode where they really break down a lot of that, what it means, and some of the evaluations of the Pirates players and where they fall on that scale. Basically, just real quick, but you definitely want to go check them out. Just you can look at these stats and say, okay, this player is having a great spring, and then you look at the opponent quality and you see that they're basically facing single A, double A players. That's a way of filtering that, but it goes to, and that it's just like baseball, for anything, there's a measurement for just about anything you can think of. So it's cool that they've quantified that, but it really goes to show that, some guys, they look really good on the stat sheet, but really it's about the quality of opposition that they're facing. And so it really, that's why stats aren't something that we always can lean a whole lot on. I think spring training more than anything, an eye test is a big part of it, but even that gets skewed because of the conditions, the wind, the sun, the high sky. That can play, some games with your perception of, the defense of an outfielder because of the conditions. So yeah, a lot of that stuff gets thrown out, and I 100% agree with what you say that, the backfields, some sidelines that guys are throwing, or bullpen sessions that guys are throwing, or some of those games on the backfield. That's the batting cages, things like that can go a long way into deciding who makes it north with the team, or in this case, I guess they're going south to start the season. Um, but yeah, that spring training is really hard to evaluate. But that goes back to what we were just saying: is that we're trying to make heads or tails of something that we're not getting all of the information. We're not seeing everything that the coaches and the GM and the player development guys and the evaluators, everything they're seeing. So we just do it for fun and do our very best, and hope to be right at least, a certain percentage of the time.
Yeah, because I mean, I saw Matt Gorski hit a home run again today, and it was in the ninth inning. I believe Derek Hall also hit a home run. I'm assuming in that ninth inning, they're not facing the level of competition they would be facing at Major League, regular season. So, like, I reposted it because I repost a lot of it's a fun thing. I mean, Matt Gorski is a 27-year-old kind of like journeyman minor leaguer through the pirate system, not like, from system to system, but he's worked his way up through the system, and he gets kind of like this moment in the sun. It may be like his moment in the sun. There might not be anything beyond this. So I kind of share that, and like somebody comments underneath it, get him a first baseman's mitt and bring him north. And you were saying, like, because that's what kind of made me laugh a little bit, was they're not coming north, but we all say coming north. The other piece of this is that Matt Gorski actually does play some first base. So the guy doesn't, the comments that are being made are not even like recognizing of the minor league player that, yeah, he actually does play some first base, has been in some of the discussions throughout, the X sphere, throughout, the podcasters and different stuff like that. But it's also realizing like the level of competition they're playing against, but also realizing that even if they're playing against, say, like, I know Josh put it out there, and like I said, go back and listen to it because I mean, he wasn't saying this was like the be all to end all stat of like, okay, if a guy's performing well and they're performing
Hmm.
against like a certain level, but it gives an idea, I think,
Yeah.
in different directions. If a guy is performing poorly and he's performing against, you know, single A, double A competition, okay, maybe my ears perk up a little bit. If a guy is a pitcher and he's performing well, but he's also kind of doing the same where it's against a lower level competition, okay, maybe my ears are perking up a little bit, but it also doesn't mean that if a guy's performing well, he's performing as high competition, that stuff is going to work out because, I mean, I thought back to, Henry Davis last year, and I was thinking, okay, so what was his, you know, the op qual average, the opponent quality average, where would it sit? And last year it sat around a 7.9. And if we remember, Henry Davis's spring training last year, I mean, we had him pegged, and I'm not saying we as, me and you or me and Chris or whoever it may have been talking about it, kind of like maybe in the royal we sense was saying that, he was, ready. I think I said last year, I don't think he did anything to dispel that he shouldn't be the starter. I mean, at that point in time, you had Yasmani Grandal, who was injured at that point in time. You had Andy Rodriguez, who was what we thought was out for the season, came back a little bit towards the end of last season. And then you had Jason DeLay. So, I mean, at that point in time, I mean, kind of who should be the starter? I mean, I would say, give Henry his shot. His opposition quality average was a 7.9, which basically means it's sitting around like, triple A, but it means he's faced some guys that are probably major league quality, some guys that weren't. And he had a 1.067 OPS, 4 home runs. His exit velocity, which is something we talked about last time, was around a 92.3. You start to get over that 90, 95 average, you're looking at a good quality at bat, and he was hitting the ball hard. So I mean, yeah, it meant something to say that he didn't do anything wrong, that he shouldn't be the starter, but did it give you the idea that he was going to have a successful major league season? Kind of, well, obviously not. So I mean, even these guys that are having these seasons, we talked about Jack Sawinski last week, and how he's hitting the ball hard. I kind of look at that kind of stuff, but I don't think that means that instantly equals success for the upcoming season. That's where I say, like, when I was thinking about starting the show, doing that different type of stuff, like, I mean, we're looking to quantify this type of stuff. We're looking to find patterns. Andrew Heaney's struggling. Every other left-handed pitcher that's come through the Pirates, and brought into the Pirates over the last couple of years, struggled during spring training. So he's obviously going to turn this thing around. Well, we don't know that. So I mean, that's the thing to me, is like, we're looking for all of this stuff, and we can have these conversations, and it's very fun because baseball is back. But in the end, I mean, I think that we really don't know kind of what's going to happen once the regular season starts. It's more about maybe the battles that are happening and just different things. And even last year, there was a battle. There was a battle between Jared Triolo and Leo Figueroa was in that mix, and then Nick Gonzalez. I mean, obviously, Jared Triolo wanted, he was the starting second baseman, but as the season went on, different things start to happen, and that's why Nick Gonzalez gets to come up and have a fairly comparable season to what Jared Triolo had. But there were people that weren't even talking about Nick Gonzalez last spring training because, I mean, they saw other players performing better. Not that Nick Gonzalez performed poorly, and kind of made decisions on that, but it didn't define what Nick Gonzalez's season was going to be.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, the op qual I think provides context, but doesn't define the performance. But when you were running down Henry Davis's spring from last year, I was looking at before the game today. I got busy at work, so I didn't see exactly a whole lot. And it wasn't on TV anyway, so I didn't get a chance to see what was going on. So I don't know if Endy played today or not. But I was looking at Endy's numbers this spring before today. They played today. Batting average 368, on base 478, slugging 579, so a 1.057 OPS and an opposition quality of 7.8. So eerily similar to the spring training that Henry had last year, at least to this point. So speaking of battles too, that's a battle that they're having. Um, but that's a little more nuanced because these guys are such highly ranked prospects. What exactly do you want to do? Do you want Endy to start in AAA, where he can get every day at bats? Do you want to put him in the backup role? I mean, he's still young, and he lost a whole season to the almost essentially a whole season to the Tommy John surgery. But the games that he played in AAA last year, he was still a negative 2.4 age differential from the everybody else, from AAA. So he's almost 2.5 years ahead of guys at the similar level. So I think it puts into a little bit of context also how young Endy is, and that's a good thing, for him to come up. And but it also means that we can have maybe a little more time to let him develop fully. He's having a strong spring. I mean, Henry's not having a terrible spring. Just under 300 for the batting average, and his op qual is 7, so it's not too far off, to provide that extra context. But that's a battle that I think a lot of people have their eyes on. But first base is probably the most pressing concern there. But we got the injury report that Spencer Horwitz is hitting off a tee now, so he's probably, they said, a few weeks away from playing in games. So, barring any setbacks, I think that's not it's glaring now because you hear a guy had surgery, he's out for a little while, um, but it seems like he's on track or maybe even a little better than we initially thought. So that takes a little pressure off of that because if you need to just get by for a week or so, maybe we can have 2 weeks. That's where Jared Triolo, Nick York, some of these guys that are on the 40 man can step in, and it doesn't become quite the battle that some of these other positions are. I do think that the most pressing one is backup catcher.
Yeah, and here's my thing, is Scott. I might put you on the spot here for a second, and I'll put myself on the spot as well. I'll give my answer afterwards. Was what would you do with the backup catcher situation? Because I mean, at this point in time, I mean, Joey Bart is the starter, barring injury. I mean, he's a guy, but he's also a guy that hasn't really caught a ton of games. I mean, you'd be looking at, I mean, at the max, I'd say 90 to 100 games in a season. So even if he reaches the top, you're still looking at, 62 other games that need to be caught. I mean, what would you do with this? You have, Andy coming back from an injury. You have Henry, who's underperformed in the majors, hits
Yeah,
the crap out of the ball, in the minors. And then you have Jason DeLay, who is, I think that everybody's called him, and I would call him myself, is just a very serviceable backup catcher, a good defensive catcher, a good game caller, a good game planner. So, I mean, and like I said, I will answer this as well. I think this is kind of a discussion that needs to be had is, kind of what would you do? And we're going to hold you to this, and we're going to play this at the end of the season. No, I'm joking.
sure, sure. No, go ahead. Well, I think the Pirates have kind of hamstrung us a little bit because they have gone a completely different path to start than I would have. I probably, if you really told me that, okay, we got to have Henry, we got to figure him in somewhere because really you watch him play at AAA, and for the most part, you're like, what more does he have to prove at AAA? He's got to figure it out at the major league level. So I probably would have moved the chess pieces differently myself. Probably would have kept Reynolds in left, would have platooned, and you know what, shoot me if you want, but I think Henry Davis probably should have been the right-handed platoon of right field, but give him the full off season to work it and make that his focus. I think that he would benefit mentally, taking some of that pressure off of him to call games and to work on that extra stuff that comes with being a catcher, even a backup catcher. So you have him in right field because he's got cannon for an arm. You play half your games at PNC Park, which among I'm sure that no outfield position in all of Major League Baseball is easy because nothing is easy at that kind of level. But of available outfield positions, I mean, you're probably looking at PNC Park for right field, and you're probably looking, Minute Maid Park for left field as being some of the easier, less ground to cover. And he's got a cannon for an arm. So then that opens up probably delay to start the season as the backup for Joey Bart, and then as the season goes along, I think I want to bring Endy back up once he's shown that he can get that momentum going. He's still coming back from the injury, take some of those mental roadblocks away as he can perform. And then I start transitioning Joey Bart into more time
Here it
first
comes.
base DH, you know. I mean, we learned from Moneyball. It may look easy to be a first baseman, but it's not. It's incredibly difficult. But yeah, move those chess pieces a little bit more. There's got to be a reason that they are obsessed with positional flexibility, and maybe we're seeing this is why. But I think that Joey Bart, yeah, he's built like a catcher. He's had good success there, but long term future of these guys that we have to hang our hats on. I think if you can take him, maybe the Joe Mauer route a little bit that they did at the very end and just lengthen the career a little bit, maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before because I mean I think we had a conversation just on the side at one point in time where I'm just like Joey Bart not this year. I hear a lot of people mentioning him first base this year, but I don't disagree with that in the long term. I mean, especially you have Spencer Horwitz coming back, and you would hope that he would come back and be the player that you expected him to be when you traded for him. You have him for 6 years, so there's time to put this plan into place. If you need that right-handed platoon, you could kind of get Joey Bart into that. I mean, right now, like I think that we were along the same lines with Henry Davis, is that it was it was a failure a little bit to a certain degree a few years ago when they put him in right field. But at that point in time, I think that you almost kind of needed to make a decision to say, do we want you to be a catcher? We want you to be a right fielder? And, just kind of cut the cord at that point in time. And they, wobbled on that a little bit. Henry, to his credit, put in the work and became I mean, probably still by the metrics, a below average catcher, maybe around like an average catcher, not somebody who we said, last week that will, stick out as just like looking completely lost behind the plate. But then you always knew that, or you would hope that Endy was coming back, a guy who is a better defensive catcher, a guy who also plays multiple positions. So, I mean, for me this year, I mean, I would think that you start out with Bart as a starter, you start out with DeLay as the backup, you put both Henry and Endy down into AAA to start the season, and that at some point in time, if his rehab allows it, you start moving Endy kind of to other positions. I mean, it still doesn't solve the problem, I guess, quote unquote, problem that you have, in that at that point in time, you still have, three catchers. And then if somebody comes up, you're going to still have to move stuff around, to kind of make it work because, and like I said, I don't see Bart moving to first base this year, but in the future, I think it might be a good idea. But I mean, I guess a good problem to have because that means they're all hitting, they're all performing well, and they're all looking for a spot to play. But yeah, I mean, I know that Endy is hitting well right now. I mean, I've seen some stuff put out there that, you need, offense wherever it may come from. But I mean, also you're trying to protect an asset of a player who, was a very good prospect, is still a very good baseball player in my eyes. And I wouldn't, want to see him be working his way back from an injury, have not played most of the season last year, and then put him into a backup catcher role where even if you kind of split the duties. I mean, I know that Joey Bart hasn't caught that much, and if we may be overestimating that it may be only 2 days a week, but it's like, okay, so Eddie's working his way back from an injury, and you're only going to play him 3 days a week because the Pirates have been very staunch on the fact that, he's a catcher for right now. I mean, I would almost get him back to the minors and work him back into the positions that he'd played before, but just be more kind of cautious about it.
Yeah, and well, that's what I mean about, they kind of hamstrung us by making the decisions they've already made. By moving Reynolds to right field, you completely remove that ability for Henry to play outfield, unless Reynolds gets hurt, I suppose, because you're not going to put Henry in left field. It's just he can't handle it. He doesn't have the range, I don't think, and he's a heck of an athlete and probably one of the hardest working guys you'll find. And so, that we saw that with the development at catcher. He just put his mind to it and outworked everybody, and got better and got passable at that. But yeah, they some of the movements they've made really do kind of complicate this and make it a little tougher to move the pieces where you'd want them to move. And I agree with the sending Endy to AAA for if for no other reason. That's a major surgery to get over, and especially as a catcher who's going to try to throw down to second base. I mean, from what I saw in spring, he was throwing behind runners and he was throwing down to second base, so he must have some confidence in that elbow. But uh, you know, I'm sure that there's some kind of seed in the back of his mind that that might have some kind of doubt. I love the way that Endy handles the pitchers. I love the way that he was calling games and the fire that he was showing and the competitiveness and especially the bond he had with Oviedo. I think those are intangibles that um, I didn't see from Henry. Henry seems like a very you know lead by action kind of guy, where Endy's going to speak up and he's, more of a talker, just from what I've seen on TV. And so I think as far as like managing a pitching staff, I think based on what we've seen already, I think Endy leans to that direction. And based on his age too, maybe he is like the long term catching option, depending on what Bart does, and if they do, again, if they would have started the first base migration in the off season with Bart, then that makes it more of an option to open up, especially when you know where you are with catchers and having four guys that can catch. Because when it comes down to a delay, he comes up. He was never an embarrassment at the plate, and so the one season was pretty heavy on the BABIP, but really, when it comes down to it, he's going to give you a good at bat, and he seems to come up with some clutch hits when he needs to, which is something this team desperately needs. And he is just a quality professional backup catcher. Right along the lines of probably even a little better than a Keith Osick or Umberto Coda. We've had quite the lineup of backup catchers over the years.
Yeah, and the one thing that like keep comes out of this is that I mean I'm hearing, you know, the injury type of thing. Like if this injury wouldn't have happened, and you know, we have talked about from the beginning of spring training of kind of keeping an eye on what happens and what is the number one priority. I mean, I put it out there, at the beginning of spring training is like, yeah, I'm going to watch these games, I'm going to see what happens, but in the end, like the biggest thing for me is that everybody comes out of spring training healthy. People are probably, waiting for us. I mean, we're 30 some minutes in at this point in time to talk about, Brian Hayes being out for a little bit, feeling that tightness on, his side. Uh, Bailey Falter being pulled from a start. Um, Todd Tomzik saying he is okay, but I mean, you never really know. He's okay for right now. Could it develop into something else? Different stuff like that. David Bednar, he had a bad outing. He's a guy that was injured during last spring training, has had injuries, throughout his major league career. For me, I mean, that's the biggest thing for the Pirates here because, I mean, I hate to switch sports, but the times that the Steelers have made it to the Super Bowl, their offensive line has been like pretty much healthy or beyond healthy like for the entire season. And that's not, I don't think, a coincidence. With the Pirates, like last year, I mean, people will say, oh, well, Ben Charrington was given an excuse. Well, no. Endy, who you were probably counting on at least being the backup catcher, if not the starting catcher, was injured. Then you have David Bednar get injured. Then you have Colin Holderman get injured. You have Carmen Majinsky to get injured. You have Keith Brian Hayes starting the season injured and going through the season injured. I mean,
Moretta.
you have Moretta, Baraki. You have all of this stuff, kind of happen. I mean, Bart was even injured during the season. You had Nick Gonzalez get, injured and sent back down.
Jared
So,
Jones, yeah.
yeah, I mean, Jared Jones, was out for a portion of the season. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that starts to happen, but that was kind of like my number one priority. I don't know how, any of these were really affected. I mean, we could, you know, dive deep into Brian Hayes' injury history. We could dive deep into, a bunch of different things. The big thing that came out is, why did we sign Brian Hayes? If he has this injury history, well, prior to the signing, he had a problem with his wrist that came up after exploding in 2020, 2021, he got injured with the wrist, sliding back in the first game, and then, was in and out for that. And then during his minor league career, he had kind of like the normal stints on the 7-day IL that, a lot of minor league players have. So it wasn't something that, thought was going to, hinder him for an entire season or for an entire career. I mean, even in 2023, he was out for a month with the back, which, you don't like to see, but then came back and kind of had a resurgence. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing for me is like, wait till opening day starts, wait till all of this stuff comes out with these injuries, wait till, people are thinking about different stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, for a team like the Pirates, if you're kind of counting on a Bailey Falter, if you're kind of counting on a Brian Hayes, which I know that you are, David Bednar, I mean, different stuff like that. I mean, players that have been out, yeah, those injuries can cause, you know, a little bit of a ripple in your plans for that season.
Yeah, I'm not too concerned about these particular injuries. This is the benefit of the local reporting and the beat reporters. I think it was Alex that had a great article with Key Brian Hayes talking about, well, I probably didn't drink enough water that day. I didn't stretch right. So, I mean, it's spring training, early in the season, and spring training, you're gonna hear a lot about obliques, and so hey, just shut it down. Abundance of caution. Same thing with Bailey Falter. They were saying that he's had some general body soreness, and Shelton and Charrington are like, you know what? Don't make him drive to an away game if he's going to be sore. Let's just skip him, and we'll see where it goes from there. So, unless something else comes up, these things happen. They need days off. They are, like we were just saying not that long ago. They're putting in this work that we don't see. So if he's going extra hard on a bullpen that he's throwing, and it just tires him out more, or stepped right, whatever. These things happen. Just like, I may not be the biggest gym rat, but when I go and I hit the weights a little bit, or I hit the exercise bike and just feel sore the next day, it's gonna have some effect. And these guys are professional athletes, and they're figuring out their routine and getting back into the swing of things. And if they're gonna, I would much rather just be cautious and, hey, we're gonna shut them down today because of some soreness that really doesn't have anything to do with their arm, or in Key Brian Hayes' case, his back. If it's has nothing to do with his disc issue in his back, then that's much more forgivable than if they said, "Oh, my lower back's a little tight. I need to take a few days off." That's where I start panicking, because we know what a ticking time bomb that back is.
Yeah, and the other part with Cabrian is like, I mean, he was doing, other baseball activities. He was still fielding. I think before a game that was actually televised, he was like out there doing stretches where he was stretching beyond, I mean, probably what I can stretch right now. So, I mean, but like definitely stretching his back, definitely doing, different activities and not showing any, pain from it,
He's
whatever
not
it
laid
may
up in a
be.
hospital bed like Colin Holderman was last spring training.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like the biggest thing to me is just like, and I believe that they are going to be very, kind of cautious with Cabrian, especially, what he can bring to the team when he is healthy. So if something comes up, if he mentions something, I mean, and I know that they tried to watch it last year, and they even talked about at the beginning of the season that they would kind of like, watch what was happening, doing different things. Um, I always said, are we going to plan for like a month shutdown at some point in time? I mean, if that's what it takes, if it takes him playing 4 days a week and becomes almost like kind of like a part time player, the amount of impact, if he's healthy, that he can put in that time, yeah, I mean, it's definitely well worth it. It's not ideal. I mean, you would want him playing 110 to 130 games a year. If he plays 100 and plays them well, I mean, I believe he's going to impact those games enough. I don't think that there is a ton of drop off with Triolo. Uh, the offense is, you know, kind of what Brian Hayes is when he's not knocking the cover off the ball for a few months. And the defense is, maybe a slight tick below, but for the most part, I mean, if you could have him fill in for that, and that's where, like, kind of like we go back to the Spencer Horowitz health. Is he going to have to play games at shortstop because IKF doesn't perform well or whatever it may be? I mean, but that's the discussions we have during spring training, and until in the same aspect of the NFL, until they play that first game, you could win every single preseason game. You could win every single spring training game. And then you get there opening day and completely lay an egg during the first series. So, I mean, I'm just looking forward to that, to have some more actual baseball discussions, which we've been having, but like ones that really count, ones where guys, I think at that point in time, have kind of flipped that switch. They're going 100%. And it's just not like a poor outing because maybe your tummy hurts and you ate the wrong thing for breakfast.
PNC Park doesn't have a spot for Grapefruit League championships.
If